Good morning and welcome to the second day of the Kentucky-based Mobile Institute. The Vanderbilt Divinity School is proud to present Mobile Institutes all over the country, and we are very thankful to our planning committee for Kentucky-based Mobile Institute. We've had an exceptionally great awakening as we supped with Dr. Lewis Brogdon last night and Dr. Dwayne Mack. And Dr. Dwayne Mack has two books that I hope all of you will purchase. And as we move into this day, I can promise you it will not disappoint. We have a fantastic moderator and a great panel. And then you will hear from an exceptional leader. So I'm hopeful that once you have finished this particular morning panel, you'll join us again in the afternoon, because the Kentucky-based Planning Committee, consisting of Reverend Carol Ruthven, Reverend Cindy Cushman, Reverend Stachelle Bussey, and Reverend Visha Sousa, has really given its all. And I can say on behalf of Dean Emily M. Towns and the whole family at Vanderbilt Divinity School, we are proud to be able to present these opportunities to enter into the dialogue and the discourse over what it means to reimagine public safety. Now, as you move into this wonderful event, please know that we all thank the Henry Luce Foundation for the funds to sponsor these wonderful opportunities to progress in our thinking, to be critical in our engagement, and to look forward to the future. I present to you Reverend Carol Ruthven.
Thank you, Dr. Smallwood. We're grateful to you and everybody at the Vanderbilt Divinity School for elevating and providing a vital platform for public theology and the education that will help all of us move forward in this hugely important area of racial justice. Today, I'm delighted to let you know that we are able to have Senator Reginald Thomas, who has been a strong moral voice in Kentucky for many, many years, a champion for racial justice in our community. He will offer some opening and closing remarks. We're fortunate today to be blessed to have as our moderator, Dr. Cherie Dawson Edwards, who is Associate Dean of Arts and Science for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at the University of Louisville, as well as being an Associate Professor in the Department of Criminal Justice at the University of Louisville. Our panelists, we have invited from a cross-section of people in the community, religious leaders, civic leaders, community activists, because we know that public safety has an impact on many different segments of our community. And so we're delighted to have this broad cross-section of expertise in exploring how we reimagine public safety. Our panelists include Karina Barillas, who is the Executive Director of La Casita Center in Louisville, the Reverend Troy Thomas, who is the Senior Pastor of Quinn Chapel AME Church in Louisville, the Reverend Valerie Mayo, my clergy colleague. She is the priest in charge at St. George's Episcopal Church in Louisville and a leader in the urban partner missioner of the Episcopal Diocese of Kentucky. We will also have the Reverend Stachelle Bussey, who is the founder and executive director of the Hope Boost. She is also the pastor of MVMT Community Fellowship and member of the Louisville Review Board. And so I'm delighted to be here. I serve the Episcopal Church of Our Savior in Madison County and co-chair our Dawson Commission for Racial Reconciliation. So I turn the floor over to the Honorable Senator Reginald Thomas.
Dr. Ruffin, thank you very much. I've got to catch myself because I'm so tempted to call you Carol, but it's good to see you again. As we all know, the horrific death of George Floyd last May of 2020 really caused a stirring, not just in this country, but around the world, and forced us to really look at ourselves as human beings in this world, and to ask ourselves, are we really treating ourselves like we want to be treated? Are we really giving everyone the opportunities that they deserve as human beings? In essence, are we all being treated equally? And with the ascent and the prominence of the Black Lives Matter movement and other groups, we had to have very serious discussions, inward discussions, one of which looked at policing and our police really doing their job in providing equal treatment and fair treatment to all communities, in particular, the underserved minority communities. And so I'm so delighted that Dr. Ruffin organized this discussion, talking about reimagining public safety and allowing us to again take a deep look at the police and what we can do differently to again become that more cohesive, more equal community. Again, as I said, this is really like a homecoming for me because your moderator, Dr. Cherie Dawson, I know very well. She was my boss at one time when she returned to Kentucky from her scholarly studies. She chaired the Department of Criminal Justice at Kentucky State University, and I thoroughly enjoyed working with her, and we got a lot done there. She has now moved on to University of Louisville, taking her services and her scholarship there, where she's an associate dean in the Arts and Sciences Department with Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Louisville, which is also, she's also affiliated with the Department of Criminal Justice. Cherie is an outstanding person. And then one of your panelists today is my former pastor, Dr. Troy Thomas, whom I will say publicly, probably the best pastor I've ever had. I just enjoy every Sunday morning with Reverend Thomas and his inspiring ministry, and regrettably, good for the university, good for the city of Louisville. He's gone there now, but regrettably for my church, St. Paul AME in Lexington, he's left. But you will enjoy hearing from him as well as from all the other panelists. So again, I'm gonna turn it over to Dr. Cherie Edwards, my friend and my former colleague, and she will tell you what we're going to discuss today as part of this morning panel. The floor is yours, Dr. Dawson Edwards.
Thank you, Senator Thomas, and thank you for the stroll down memory lane. Yes, I was his boss, but before that, I was very much his colleague in one of my first jobs as a professor at Kentucky State University. So I certainly still hold Kentucky State University very dear to my heart. I also should say that Reverend Bussey, Stachelle, as I know, Stachelle was one of my former students as well. So I'm super excited to be here to moderate this, phenomenal panel. I must say that as a professor of criminal justice, oftentimes when I moderate panels or facilitate discussions, it's usually with either folks, organizing in the community or people in the criminal justice, system. So it is really good here to be with so many folks, clergy or whatnot, to get their perspectives on the kind of stuff that I've been teaching about. I now can count, it's been 20 years. I'm in my 10th year at the University of Louisville, but in my 20th year, teaching criminal justice at the collegiate level. So I'm super excited to hear their perspectives. The way that the thing is going to happen today is that we are going to give each panelist, 15 minutes or so to kind of give their perspectives on what reimagining public safety means to them. I think that we all know that has different connotations. There's different terminology. There's misinterpretations of certain terminology. But for this moment and for their expertise and experiences. I just want them to talk about what it means to them. What does it look like? What does it mean to reimagine something that has been so entrenched in such a system that has to completely be reformed if we're going to reimagine something different, because it's pretty entrenched as its current iteration has been entrenched for some time now. So what I guess I'll do is just invite the panelists to the screen, and we'll, kind of take a time, 15 minutes or so, to talk about your perspectives. And I don't have any real order or whatnot, so I guess I'll just call on people. And so just be prepared to be next when it's your turn. So I am going to start with Reverend Thomas. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your perspectives on what reimagining public safety means to you or for you?
Sure. First, let me say thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this groundbreaking opportunity for us to engage this conversation. And that really is the purposes of how we start reimagining public safety is conversation. Too long in our communities, we have not had the opportunity to really consider and having the format and the places to have conversations. Very often we are limited in our access. And if you have access to get engaged in having those conversations, you also have to come to the table with something to say. And so very often we push in leadership to get into the room. And then when you get to the room, get to the table. And then we get people in the room and to the table, and they don't have anything to say. They're just excited that they're in the room. But if we're going to really consider how we can bring about effective change, we have to look at variations of opportunity. I look at it as a matrix in public safety. Public safety is just not the notion of officers serving in various communities, serving in different levels within the police department, but public safety is also multifaceted. And so therefore we have to approach the subject matter of reimagining from a multi subject perspective. We have to look at one thing that really is important is that from the religious perspective, from church, from my perspective, we have all established our own personal theos. That is how we view God individually. And with that view of God, it also drives us to be engaged and how we engage. We have to get away from the negativity of somebody is doing more than somebody else. Somebody is seen when other people are not seen. We have to understand that we all bring our own perspectives to the table and to the fight about bringing about radical change. And I call it radical at this time because we're still doing some things. Last night, and the guest speaker that was last night, Dr. Mack, really opened up the historical context about policing that was very enlightening and provides us a challenge not only to look at it from a historical perspective, but also from where do we move from here. And so today, when we talk about reimagining public safety, there's some things that I think that are very important. One is that biblically we know Dr. James Cone's book, The God of the Oppressed. And the issue becomes how people are being oppressed. Oppression, is very real. My wife, who's a professor, taught a class at Midway College, and she had the opportunity to teach some students. And she brought up the issue with regards to Dr. Maxine Thomas, the issue of oppression to her students at Midway College. And some of the students raised their hand and said, I don't know what that means. I don't understand when you're talking about oppression. What do you mean people, we have all these opportunities in our country and our state and the Commonwealth, and why are you talking about people are being oppressed? So we have to change the narrative in educating and re-educating people when we use certain terminology to get to the table to have the conversation. Our perspectives, how we look at things, how we regard things becomes so important, and when we talk about reimagining, we have to also look at the understanding that we are cross-generational, cross-cultural, Those things come to the table as well, because what happens in one community does affect another community. And very often, I have discovered in conversations with individuals about policing and about public safety is that some people don't think that it's in their neighborhood. It's amazing to me how we can watch news outlets and social media outlets and hear people have conversations when something happens in South Louisville or in historic Louisville, and the people on the news are saying, "I never thought that a shooting would take place in my neighborhood." That like because where I live, things cannot happen. And now that we're seeing a more multimedia circumstances of social media, that we are now seeing instant results and instant violence and instant criminal acts against people of color. That the idea that we are living in a bubble is far gone. And we now have to realize that that bubble has been burst. We have advocates, we have individuals who are, like I said earlier, in the room to bring about change. And I think that it becomes important that we understand that we have to be consistent. We can't give up the fight because oftentimes governmental structures are such that throw out a notion, throw out an idea, throw out the reality that we're trying to do something different, pat you on the back for coming out, observing the protesting that took place last year and still taking place today. Let us not forget, they're still protesting. People are still protesting today because things have not changed. Just because we have a new police chief in the city of Louisville, things still have not changed. People are still being stopped. People are still being questioned by the color of your skin, walking by black, driving by black, being in the park by black. We're now in a new age of the Karen syndrome, the discourse of the Karens calling just because, and even where I live, we had an incident here that our daughter was taking pictures outside, and the neighbor, one of my neighbors, didn't recognize her. She doesn't live with us. She's grown. And she was taking pictures, and she approached her and asked her, "Where do you live?" Well, I'm in a neighborhood. Why should I have to tell you where I live? And she said, "My parents have been living here, for a while." Well, I mean, it's not hard to figure out that it may not be a lot of people of color in this neighborhood, but that's not your right to come up to somebody and ask them, "Why are you taking pictures in a public space?" And so we still have a lot of work to do as it relates to the engagement process. I'm very proud of Reverend Stachelle, as she and others who are part of community reform and review. Even though it was a battle, the nerve of individuals, and I'm going to be indignant about it, the nerve of individuals who determine that because somebody has a voice and wants to express their voice and their ideologies and bring about effective change, has the mitigated gall to stand up and say, well, they don't deserve to be on a review. Help me, Jesus. How is somebody that is in the fight and brings a perspective? Earlier I said our theos brings a perspective to the table, and you want to block them from the table because they don't talk like you, they don't sound like you, they don't look like you, they're not using the language that you use, they're not in agreement, they're not rubber stamping everything that comes down the pipe. And so my experience with that, even when I was appointed to the former, and I say former because it's no longer in existence, I was appointed to the Chief of Police Advisory Committee for Division 1. And so we would come to these meetings, and my first meeting, sometimes you have to act like you're glad to be in the room. So you just listen to what people are saying, and I'm just sitting there listening. Now, it's only 2 people of color on the advisory committee at that time. The new chief hasn't reestablished the advisory committee. That's why I say it's old. And so the second meeting, I'm like, well, I have a question. And they looked at me like I wasn't supposed to ask a question, but the chief has given us data and information. So I thought I had a right to ask, since I'm on the committee, to advise the chief. And it became apparent to me that individuals who are in the room to make decisions and to give advice to the chief were scared to give advice and only want to talk about things that affect their perspective, but not to affect the change and perspective of the community that we're supposed to represent. We have to get to a place that we understand that when people are elevated, people have the opportunity to bring impact. We have to learn about our goings and support their efforts, and it's not just about prayer. Prayer does work, but we also have to put feet to prayer. We have to put mouth to prayer. We have to put action to prayer. We have to engage people. And that's about conversation. We have to open up the opportunity. The doors of the church, we keep saying, are open, even though during this pandemic, a lot of churches are not open, ours in particular as well. However, the doors of the church have been open. And if you really want to go there, Jesus was very radical. I mean, he was ostracized for his radical perspectives about social justice. And it's a shame that we are now in a society that even when you speak about social justice in the church, and not only in the Black community, but in the non-Black communities as well, people are ostracized and say that's not the gospel of Jesus Christ. Hello? Did he not turn over the tables at the money changers? Did he not come and say he is going to overrule the government system to bring change? We are dealing with people who are oppressed. And if we don't begin to recognize bringing about change for social justice, social reform in our communities, having how we reimagine, we have to start rethinking things. And that is in the beginning of our individual conversations, where we are now dealing with governmental systems who are trying to stop being taught and teaching our children about history, American history. Hello, this is America. We have American history. You can't erase 1619 out of the books like it didn't happen, and for 400 years, and the tragedies in slavery that took place in our country, and say, well, we don't want to talk about that, but it's okay to talk about a Confederate flag. That's a part of our American history, but you don't want to talk about the racism behind the flag. We don't want to talk about those things. So reimagining public safety really comes down to really community. What is the community's view about public safety? What is our constituents saying about public safety? How people feel? Do we have those gut feelings? Those butterflies when we're driving and we bypass a police officer on the side of the road. Are they going to stop me because of the car that I drive? Are they going to stop me because of the neighborhood that I'm in? And whatnot. And so we have a lot of work to do. But I do say this as I close out, that it's imperative that we continue to have the conversation. The more, I'm likened to the woman in the Bible who kept going to the king and was persistent. The king kept denying, the ruler kept denying her request, and she kept coming anyway. Finally, it got to the point, okay, we're going to go ahead and honor what this woman is saying. We have to be persistent. We have to be consistent. This is a long haul fight. This is a marathon. This is not, we have to raise up and prepare new leaders, because Reverend Stachelle is not going to be there forever. And so that means we have to be engaged in communications so that we can have somebody ready to step in when she decides she wants to go into bigger and better things, and the Lord enlarges her territory, and in that means we have to have the next Joshua generation being prepared so that she can pass the baton off. And if we're going to be effective in our public safety initiatives and bringing about reform and changing the language about what it means to defund the police, it simply means that we want to reallocate. I'm an accountant by trade. That means reallocate. We set up a budget. I'm giving you a basic accounting 101. You set up a budget. If I don't use all of my money on entertainment and movie and food, that means that I can maybe shift that extra $50 to buy a new outfit or buy a new bow tie. All right. And so that's reallocation. It's not taking away from the opportunity that's in the budget. It's just reallocating. That's defunding. It is not so much taking away the opportunity to provide public safety, but it is shifting dollars so that we can maximize the opportunity. All right, y'all know I'm a preacher and I could go on forever. So I'm going to go ahead and end this message. This is my story and I'm sticking to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Reverend Thomas. That was great. And you gave us a lot of things to think about. I'm going to try really hard not to to be a panelist and stay in my moderation mode, even though it's really hard not to be like, yes, and this and this and this. So we will come back to that. And I just want anybody that's viewing this to know that after each panelist presents their initial thoughts about reimagining public safety, that we will go into a Q&A session, and you can add your question or comment into the chat, and I will make sure that I pay attention to read off as many as I can in the time that we have. And then I have an ongoing list of questions that I'm writing down as each panelist presents their perspective. So we're going to shift over, and I'm going to invite Miss Karina Barillas to share her thoughts. And hello, in Louisville, most of everybody knows everybody through somebody, and so I do know her as well, and I'm pleased to be here with you and hear your perspective. So the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días and good morning to everybody. I'm already so excited, Reverend Thomas, so happy to have heard your prophetic voice and your words that are inspiring me right now. When I received the invitation to be part of this panel, something that really caught my attention was the idea that how would I talk about reimagining public safety in a way that is life-giving and life-sustaining. And then I want to start first, what does safety mean? Because safety means something different to everybody. If you are Black, Brown, Latinx, or Indigenous, safety is a luxury. Safety is something that in your wildest dreams can become part of your life. If I talk about the experience of my people and my community, safety for us means that our children are no longer fearing to be separated from their families. Safety for our community means that we are no longer going to have children in cages and people and families and babies being separated at the border. What does it mean to my community, for me as a mother, to know that my son that is no longer looking cute because he's a teenager, that he's not going to be profiled or detained because he doesn't have the right skin color? Safety means that when I arrive, or my people arrive, or my family arrives to any place, people around us are not going to immediately assume we are undocumented and immediately deny us the human dignity to be treated with respect. That's what's safety. And then when we talk about life-giving and life-sustaining, can you imagine a little kid all the time, every day, feeling, I don't want to go to school because I don't know if when I come back, I'm going to see my mom or dad again. So the pressure, the hurt, the trauma that has caused in the idea of safety within the Latinx, the Indigenous, the Black and Brown communities, I don't have words even to explain it to someone that is not part of those communities. Now, when we also talk about safety within the context, of domestic violence or sexual assault, something that happens within our non-English speaking communities is that we are taught to believe that we are going to be safe in this, in this new country of ours. That means, we see a lot of advertisings. Please, if you feel unsafe, call the police. Well, that has unfortunately created a lot of chaos within our communities for several reasons. One of them, and the most basic of them, is that when law enforcement arrives to the scene of domestic violence and sexual assault, there are policies that mandate them to use interpreters, but the easiest thing sometimes is to use the alleged perpetrator or the kids to interpret a situation of domestic violence and sexual assault. Can you imagine the risk that we are putting these families and these children and the person that is being victimized? Also, safety for us means that only when we are the hot topic of the week, the hot topic of the month, when we are on fashion, then we have the opportunity to share what is in our hearts, but we are not invited at the table. We are an afterthought. Once, the national numbers come, just like in the pandemic, the national numbers come, oh my gosh, the Latinx community, the immigrant community, the numbers are high. Oh yeah, let's reach out to them in ways that is not meaningful to our community. So our communities are not being invited from the get-go. Some of us, take our chairs and we sit without an invitation, because we know that if we don't do it that way, then our communities won't have the opportunity to tell their story, and whatever it is, that systematic oppression needs to change. Where the transformation is gonna come from. The other part is that for some of us, in some cities, and if we're talking about Kentucky, I can think only of 2 cities where we have certain safety because of ordinances passed by the council of the city, where the police is forbidden to work with ICE. And for some of you, that doesn't mean anything. So what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that somebody that looks like me, that sounds like me, somebody that looks undocumented to a police officer that doesn't live in Louisville or in Lexington, or just decides, well, this person looks undocumented, immediately sends that person to immigration jail. So the danger is, again, for victims, for people that are being victimized by domestic violence, sexual assault. And what if I call the suicide hotline? And what if I am going to be danger for myself and the police is called for them to come and see me? And instead of taking me to the hospital for my crisis, they take me to immigration jail. The other part as well is that the language that we use, it's not an inclusive language, just by starting saying, that we are minorities. Minor comes from Latin, means less. And then all of us, at least right now in this panel, we have been considered that we are less from those ones that guide us and tell us how to save our communities and what our communities mean. So how about all of us making a stand? First of all, Black, Brown, Latinx, and Indigenous peoples, we don't need to be policed. Policed by law enforcement, policed by people around us, policed by the system, policed by any kind of organization or institution that pretends to know who we are. So it goes beyond law enforcement. It is about that us as a community, how do we come in a sense of unity? How do we stop playing the games of white supremacy, where we have been put ourselves in positions where we have to compete who is the most oppressed or who is the largest minority? So with that, then we can talk about safety in a way that is life-sustaining. Because our people, our community, our families are tired. We are not only going through a global pandemic, we are going through oppression of years from the colonizers, from the enslavers, from the settlers. So we haven't stopped. Our ancestors couldn't stop it. What are we going to do today, us as a community? As a city, as a state? How are we going to support each other? How we are going to, in unity, stand up for every single person without looking at each other like we are competing for the price of the largest minority, for the price of the most oppressed. So only then, in my humble opinion, and only then we can look at each other, as siblings, sisters, as brothers, and work together and be at the table from the beginning and making a transformational change, not a Band-Aid, but a transformational change that will allow us to have that safety that we all deserve.
Thank you so much. And you brought a lot of broadening of the concept to the conversation, and moving away from just policing in the law enforcement traditional way, but how Black and brown bodies are policed in various ways throughout various systems, not just the criminal justice system, but our, educational systems and, the health inequities that exist. And so policing is in safety is certainly a broader concept. And I just want you to know that I too have a son who is 15 and was just deemed 6'2" yesterday at school, and he's cute to me, but I also realize a 6'2" Black boy is perceived differently than what his mama sees, and we'll get into that a little bit later to talk about the trauma of parenting and navigating, even in this city, of being Black and brown and navigating parenting of our children. So thank you for bringing that to light. So I'm going to ask Reverend Valerie Mayo to share your thoughts with us.
Greetings, sending abundant greetings from the Episcopal Diocese of Kentucky, from St. George's Episcopal Church, and from our Diocesan Urban Partnership. My thanks to Reverend Carol and the members of the Mobile Institute for this invitation to be with you today. June 16th makes it 1 year since my family and I relocated here from the Alexandria neighborhood outside of DC. And inside of that station, July 1 marks 1 year since I have been assigned as the Episcopal Urban Missioner, the priest in charge at St. George's Episcopal Church, and the Episcopal Lutheran Campus Minister at the University of Louisville. My daughter is a rising sophomore at Kentucky State University. We will be checking her in as soon as we offboard this conversation. So good for that. And then I also have a fifth grader. I too have a young Black boy where I share the concerns that were lifted in this room. So in preparation for today's discussion and talking about, reimagining public policy, I think from a faith perspective, for me, it's reimagining who we are. Reverend Thomas, I heard you say, you named it, we're human beings. Karina, I'm hearing you with, the designations and the categorizations of these human bodies. And it returns to our story of origin, our Genesis story, that we have all been divinely created in the image of God. And with that, we were all empowered to be good stewards of God's creation. But somewhere in our human history, and we all know when this occurred, that power and that authority of categorizing bodies was stripped of all of us as one humanity, and was taken by a dominant culture who's now set up these boxes. Much of the work that I've been doing in this last year, for those who are unfamiliar, the Episcopal Church has historically been 90% white. And I do think that the census, those demographics may be changing. But to name the spaces that we are in, the church that I serve is on 26th and Oak. It has been labeled as one of the Black congregations in our diocese, and yet the people, the members, the congregation, they do not define themselves that way. They are a blended community. The historically Black congregation is on 12th Street in Louisville, the Church of Our Merciful Savior. And, the truth behind that is that those individuals were not permitted once upon a time to worship at the cathedral on 2nd Street. And so they have their own place of worship that was built for them. So much of the work, the Bible tells us to put aside falsehoods, right? And in love to tell the truth. So the last year, if those are familiar with Sacred Ground, it's a initiative that was a curriculum that was developed by Katrina Brown. She is an Episcopalian. It has broken out in many different circles, but in tangent, in a partnership with the Union of Black Episcopalians. This curriculum was intended for white people to do the work amongst themselves, and the work being racial healing work, to start to name, to name white supremacy, as we brought up in this room, and to really to unpack the structures that are in play where the rest of us, who in truth are the global majority, we have become subject to those dominant structures and cultures. So that's one of the tasks that I've been assigned this last year. And Reverend Thomas, hearing you say to be in conversation, to be intentional conversation and dialogue about racist systems, racial issues with people that we haven't had these conversations before. I've been in, settings, predominantly white settings, where, it's alarming to me to know that our white sisters and brothers report that they don't talk about race. But it's not something that they have necessarily had to, where, it affects me as soon as I step out of the comforts of my home to live inside of this privilege and to begin to have these conversations. So we're speaking about, public policy. It's understanding truly what public theology is. You named it. I mean, Jesus was radical and stood up to the power structures that be. Yes, flipping over tables and saying, you know what, but we are one. We are one with our Creator, to lead from a place of love, to love God, mind, body, spirit, and soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself, right? And our great theologian, Howard Thurman, says that neighborliness is non-spatial, right? It's all about relationship. But what has been built up over time, as he speaks to, the nature of hate, well, hate and resentment are derived from inauthentic relationships. But if we've never been in settings such as this to really have these truth-telling opportunities to hear from one another and to share each other's stories and to see that we are one, that we are human, all divinely created in the image of God. I celebrate opportunities such like this. And then he goes further and saying, well, so then what is love? And, we've been called to love, Christ calls me to love. Well, what does that mean? And why is it so complicated? Well, it requires mutual respect. But that mutual respect is then built on those authentic relationships. But if we have not been in the space to really be a part of that discourse. I think about the West Louisville Now campaign, which is, it's a capital campaign by the Diocese of Kentucky, and it is awesome. It's raising $200,000 to those two churches, St. George's and the Church of Our Merciful Savior. It's to rehab their buildings, right? To restore their space. I have met so many men of a certain age, as I'm getting familiar with the community of Louisville, who are familiar with St. George's because they grew up there. They either participated or engaged in the boxing league that was part of the community center, or they were part of the basketball leagues that were out of the center. There are so many people who were at St. George's because of the dances, but anyone who has been to the space recently, you'll see that the building is literally crumbling down. So there is a capital campaign to raise $200,000. But if we tell the truth behind the story, how did it get there? It's of years of neglect. And then to name that, this is not just to rehab the physical plant of these buildings for these communities, but in empowering these communities, it's the gift for all of us, right? But so often what I've recognized in spaces with our dominant culture, our white sisters and brothers, is that we're innocent to understand the need for internal change and internal transformation. It's very easy to identify a project and to help those people out, those others over there, while not internalizing the need for us to, in Dr. King's words, become beloved community. So that's the nature of the work that I have at hand. My former supervisor, when she took me on as her seminarian, to the glory of God, I thank God for her. The first instruction that she gave me was to get to know the people, not to think of doing anything around the church. We always want to be doers. No, she instructed me to just be. And to just be with the community of faith, to be with the people of God, to get to know them, to listen and to hear their stories. And one of the gifts, if I must name it, of the pandemic was being able, as challenging as it was to get to know many of the people and then to invite St. George's. It's continued to be a space where community organizations have leaned on. It remained open throughout the pandemic. And I think that, just bringing people together at that corner, but then also understanding the need and the nature to go out and to break beyond barriers. And I think that that's one of the blessings also of this time of being in virtual space is the going and breaking beyond the barriers. Our urban partnership is comprised of 8 congregations in Louisville. Many of those congregations have been separated historically by geographic space. But the power of clicking a button and joining a Zoom room has made it possible for those who might not have ever been in the same space to begin to walk this journey of being human together. So there's so much more to say, but I am still, the tenets of our faith are to turn, to learn, to pray, worship, bless, go, and rest. So inside of that circle is the daily rhythm and daily life that I'm seeking to create as I establish partnerships and community networks with our brothers and sisters in Louisville.
Thank you so much. You hit on a lot of things and a lot of themes. Language matters. I appreciate you using the language of the enslaved and settlers and colonizers. I think that a lot of times people get away with not truth telling because they can't accept that the language that we were taught growing up was not relatively, but was whitewashed. It was designed to make people comfortable. And, for years, but certainly over the last year, it's like, be comfortable with being uncomfortable. We can't have these difficult conversations. We cannot have truth telling and racial healing and reconciliation unless we have these conversations. So I certainly appreciate you uplifting that. I think it's also, always on the forefront of our minds, especially those of us who live in Louisville. And I'm from Louisville. When we think about like the geographic differences, I believe Reverend Thomas mentioned this as well. But there are people in Louisville that have never been to other parts of Louisville. They've only been to the parts that they live in, and they get their information transmitted generationally. They get their information when they move into town. Don't go to this part. Don't go west of 9th Street. Don't go south of blah, blah. They get that and they really believe it. And so as we, become beloved community, what we need is for people to understand the truth, that people are living their lives just like you're living your life in Northeast Louisville. They're living their lives in West Louisville, and the majority of people in our city are good-hearted, good people. And the narratives that I hear, because I live in Northeast Louisville, I hear these narratives. My grandmother's house was on 22nd and on Lee, 22nd and West Lee. And so while I may live in Northeast Louisville, I certainly am no stranger to West Louisville, but I hear people talk about different parts of our city, and it's just a lack of information or bad information. We've got to change that in order for us to become community for sure and fight for justice for everyone in this community. So sorry, that was my little rant, but I appreciate you uplifting the geography of Louisville and how that is a barrier to us all coming together for sure. So I'm going to now open up the stage to Reverend Stachelle. I'm excited to hear what Reverend Stachelle has to say, so I'm going to be quiet and let you take over.
I don't know how I got at the bottom of the list of all of these giants that y'all sent before me, but I'm very, very incredibly grateful for the opportunity to speak on this panel. My absolute beloved community has become Vanderbilt of public theology in my cohort, and everybody I'm absolutely connected to. So I am grateful when two worlds collide. As I've sit and listened, I try to make sure I wrote stuff down to make sure that I didn't repeat what's already been said, because there's some good things that have already been said. And one of the things that I think we are, as we talk about public safety and reimagining it, One of the things that I like to say is how our questions that I like to ask is how are our systems working for the most vulnerable people in our society? And because so many of our systems are top down and not bottom up, we find really quickly that those systems are not working for the most vulnerable people in our society. And one might ask, who are the most vulnerable people in our society? Who are party systems? Who are the ones who are not benefiting from these systems? Well, you think about the Latinx people, you think about the immigrants, you think about these communities of color, who literally are at the bottom of every decision being made, even when it's about them or us, right? And so when you talk about public safety, it's a slew of things, some we've already talked about, right? Like food security, right? Nothing feels safe. Food security. You talk about the West and the Louisville, you talk about the biggest probably overall community, since they placed like 9 neighborhoods in one, 9 neighborhoods a part of one community. It's probably the biggest community in West Louisville, but it's the most under-resourced community. It doesn't have, there's no food security. There's no security around our mental health. There's no safety around our education. There's no safety around any of our systems. Like this group is literally underprivileged. It is and this community is severely under-resourced. And now I've had the pleasure of moving into a different community. People like to say homeless, but we call them houseless community. The houseless community, right? Like these are the most vulnerable people in our society, and none of our systems that we have are working for any of these people. Why is that? Because we seem to have systems that never involve the people who are at the bottom of these systems as a part of the solution. We criminalize everything. Why do we criminalize people being homeless? Why do we criminalize poverty? Which poverty is the biggest billion-dollar business in the world, but that's not here or there. But we criminalize everything. One of my favorite authors are who I like to read is Kelly Brown Douglas. When people can no longer be property legally, then they criminalize Black. They sexualize Black. So how can we be safe in a system that consistently finds ways to oppress us, Reverend Troy Thomas, to oppress us? Like, how are we safe? How do we reimagine public safety for people who are not even seen as real people, right? Our neighborhoods are scary, whether we want to talk about it or not. At this point, we are at 120 plus murders, right? And a lot of people will be like, a lot of people say nothing feels safe. I am a proud resident, and I am from the West End. I am from Louisville. There are things that no longer feel safe about our community. So as we begin to reimagine public safety, my hope and my prayer is that we look at these systems from bottom up. And when I am in rooms, I tell people, why don't you, if you're going to make a decision about something, why don't you make a decision and put yourself in the mind frame of the most vulnerable person who's at the bottom of that decision? If Black males are being killed by each other and by police, whenever we're talking about reimagining a public safety system, why aren't we involving the people who are literally in jeopardy from dying at the hands of these systems? The other thing is, and I think Dr. Dawson Edwards is working on something. Like, how are these communities that are already underprivileged, already under-resourced, already full of violence, how are these people policed and protected? Every single thing about this group, this vulnerable group, is criminalized. How are they responded to? We watched on TV, when somebody's having a mental health breakdown, they ultimately can die and be shot in the back because the person who shows up is a cop or a police who is not trained in de-escalation, or who is not trained to deal with a mental health crisis, right? Our communities, and also our issues are over-policed, but very unprotected. Law enforcement, right? I'm sitting on a civilian review board, right? And the thing is I'm sitting there because I represent a group of people who traditionally don't get a voice at the table. But I get to speak for Uncle Neil, and I get to speak for brother, and I get to speak for grandmama Neil. I get to speak for those people who are traditionally not heard, We don't want bullets coming through our window. We also don't want to call the police because the same thing can possibly happen. Right? We are talking, when we talk reimagining all of our systems, we have got to think about the most vulnerable group in the systems. You're right, Dr. Thomas. We've got to reallocate funds. Who needs to show up besides the police? Mental health people who can deal with a mental health crisis. You know, when things are happening and people are fighting in school, some schools get policed really, really heavy. Other schools are getting counseled, getting counselors. I can tell you to a school right now where they thought the solution was putting a cop in the school. So when a kid fights, a kid gets a charge. But it's not going to happen if his school is in the East End. You know, we literally have taken the power from the people and put it in the hands of our police systems, and ultimately has left all of us unprotected, right? Cultural competence around what you're actually dealing with. A person yelling at me, a person who looks like me yelling at me, we can get in a shouting match. But if I am culturally incompetent, I'm going to call it aggression. I'm going to say I feel threatened. I'm going to say that I fear for my life. Right? There's no cultural competence in any of our systems, whether it be our social work systems, whether it be any system that is meant to literally wrap services around us. There's no cultural competence. How do I know? Because I've worked in all of them. And people who are at the highest level have never walked a day in the shoes of the people they are making decisions for. Quality of life. When we talk about these murders in our city, what do we talk? What's happening? All over the place at this point, not just in Louisville, but in Chicago and Nashville, all these quality of life. If you walk into a community in the building and what you see is boarded up houses, what you see is there are no businesses, there are no restaurants. If you look at a community that is starved, then what happens to it? Who cares about it? There's no quality of life. People don't value life. People don't value themselves. Therefore, they can't love their neighbors well. We can take a life because we don't value our own. Because every system that we have been a part of, or that literally has been given to wrap its arms around us, is the system that continually puts its foot on our neck, right? And we talk about a criminal justice system. We talk about a criminal justice system that should be designed to restore, to rehabilitate, right, to help people. But the recidivism rate is high. Why? Because there are no options for people when they come from that. There are no options for the person who makes a mistake, but needs to be reintegrated back into society. Right? Suicides are high. Overdoses are high. Homicides are high. Why? Because the quality of life has been diminished. There's no value in our community. There's no value in the family unit. These systems have took the power from it. When I was just in school, and I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do, somebody came and said they was going to call my mama. All of a sudden, I became a lawyer. I started debating my case. I didn't need you to call hold on. Before you call her, I'm sure there's something we can work out. But nowadays, guess what? People say, call my mama. What? Call her. She ain't home. Right? Or parents don't even get the opportunity to discipline their kids anymore. Right? Like every one of our systems have been broke down. Right? So before we even deal with how we can bring outside in, like who are we going to invite to the table to talk about what safety really means? Right? I've worked, one of my internships was at the Kentucky Domestic Violence Association. And I saw how ICE would just go in and ransack a community. Right? I saw these things. I saw how I saw these things. And it's like, what feels safe? Nothing feels safe. Our communities don't feel safe. We don't even feel safe to us. So as we reimagine public safety, what are some of the things that we gotta put back in place? I'm a preacher too. First point, you gotta put the power back into people's hands. You have got to give people power again. And the second thing is when we give people power, then they learn how to value what they have. The most precious thing we have that we can never get back is life. How do we spend that time? And the third thing is investing into our communities, investing into the next group, saying that this cycle cannot continue, right? Having real consequences when police pull the trigger when they should have de-escalated. Right? We got to get some cultural competency. And then we can begin to build a real system, not a Band-Aid one. So as we reimagine public safety, when will we start inviting the people in, the most vulnerable people in our society in on the conversation to tell us what they need to feel safe? And I think I did it all in like 10 minutes. That's all I got to say.
Well, I know you will have plenty more to say, but just as an initial comment, I know that we're going to move into the Q&A, but I think the quote that you gave, well, it's a quote to me, is give the power back to the people, kind of leads into my first question. And I, again, invite anyone viewing this program to post your questions. But if not, I have lots of questions because I always do. But I wonder, this panel or program was called Reimagining Public Safety. And I'll be honest with you, as a 20-year veteran criminal justice professor who also teaches social change, I direct our social change program here in the College of Arts and Sciences. So I'm kind of the intersection of criminal justice, racial justice, and all things social justice, which had made me an anomaly for a long time. But, fortunately for me, or unfortunately, it's now the thing, these intersections of this. So my question to you is, I've always struggled with the concept of public safety. Public safety puts safety in the hands of our government officials and public servants. And a lot of what I've heard us talk about today is also the role of community, also the role of us as citizens in understanding how to manage and mediate our lives and conflicts and things like that. I think for so long we've relied on governmental agents and agencies to mediate that for us. And just full disclosure, I'm a restorative justice practitioner. So I do advocate for alternative ways of achieving justice where it's appropriate and certainly in a voluntary capacity. So I guess my question to you is, are we really talking about public safety, or are we really reimagining a new term like community safety, where we're not completely reliant on public servants for our safety? If we are the ones that know what it would take for us to feel safe, should we still be reliant on public servants? And that's whether it's a police officer, whether it's a social worker. I read an excellent article last year that said, when people were like, oh, social workers need to respond. Well, social workers are systems actors too, just like, Reverend Stachelle said. And so the same system can re-educate people to operate in the same way. So even though you think of a social worker trained in a certain capacity, if you're operating in a system that hasn't changed, then will you be more policing oriented? Will you be more sanctioning oriented? Or will you be more nurturing or whatnot? So I'm not saying that I know either way, but just to assume that you take police out of a situation and put another systems actor in there doesn't necessarily change the system. So my question is, should our safety be reliant on public servants, or what is the role of community justice and community safety in reimagining public safety? And I'm opening up to the floor to whomever wants to chime in. Somebody.
Well, I'll go ahead and tackle that. I think it's important that we do engage the community in this community safety discourse conversation, because simply it is a challenge that those who are in position, and as Reverend Stachelle mentioned, in power. And even when we talk about empowering the community, we also have to understand defining power, because we do know that some people have misconstrued what that power that they have actually is. And when we then are looking for those in the community to be empowered, they also have to know the limitations, the parameter of what they can do. One of the major challenges in public safety now is, as we always hear about, anonymously call in. If you saw something, say something, but also in our communities, a snitch can get you, you can be put in a ditch because of snitching, and so there is a discourse of relative, how do we have that community conversation with individuals to empower? Some of us grew up in environments that if you did something down the street at the playground that wasn't right, and as you're walking home, Miss Mary heard about it, she chastised you, and maybe even uh, corrected you. Amen. Your aunt who lived before you got to the house heard about it, and so she has the power to give you a spanking and then sending you home. So by the time you got home, you had your school teacher, your Sunday school teacher, the neighbor, your auntie, all these persons who are part of your environment and community bringing corrective action. So by the time you got home, it's like, well, I already got spanked. I already got disciplined. They understood their power, but they also understood that it was imperative that we are engaged. And we are now living in a community that we're not engaged. We don't even know our neighbors, in our community. I heard before, whether it was last night or something that I read, that one of the challenges in finding police officers is to find people from the West End, find people from various communities. But here's the challenge: we can encourage our people in our community to become law enforcement officers, but yet they don't bring them back into our community. They don't understand the sensitivities. They don't understand what it means. So if it and they are then bred into, and I'm using the word bred into a messed up system that does not want to change, that does and thinks that policing and opportunity of structure, systematic racism is real. And even people of color who find themselves sometimes in these systems find themselves being oppressors just as well. And we're then challenged. Like, I thought that I'm being stopped by a black police officer, I could use the language. And I worked in corporate America before pastoring, and I used to tell people that, if I had friends that call me at work, yes, this is Mr. Thomas, how can I help you? Hey, Troy, this is such and such. Hey, man, what's up? You change your language instantly, and so when we are familiar with people, but when we have individuals who are in a system who are now perpetrating and also carrying out the continuation of systematic racism, even though they are black and brown just as well. So as a community, we must understand the dynamics of it. We have to understand the whole structure of it, and the church's role, as I see too, is important too, that we're just not a four-wall building. It's the community. We pastor a community, and we pastor individuals who have different perspectives and like-mindedness in some aspects, but we also have to understand racism is real. Dr. James Cone, I'm not sorry, not the James Cone. Kane Hope Felder. I'm sorry, the late Kane Hope Felder, in his book on race and racism, and understanding that racism and biblical theology all comes together, and we must understand that racism is simply the basics understanding of to how to oppress somebody. When I look at somebody who's not the same color as me, I'm sizing them up, whether or not they are more intelligent than me, or that I should be above them. And even in the black community, we still have racism in the black community. Because you're lighter and brighter, that doesn't mean that you are really black. Because you are intelligent and you speak as growing up, speak white, you sound white. What does that mean, sound white? And even for me, because I have blue eyes, I was automatically said that I must be, mixed. Which one of your parents? No, both of my parents are black. It's just an anomaly. I'm the only one in the family with blue eyes. That had nothing to do, it's a reality of community, and we have to engage that. And so I think I've talked too long. I'm gonna stop there. Somebody else can go ahead.
One of the things that they that Pastor Thomas talked about it when they was trying to go crazy on me, trying to get on the civilian review board. What the post that they exploited, one line of it, what I basically said was, like, if these things are happening to us in our community because, like, we don't feel safe, then what is going to be the community accountability process? And so you're right, I do like the term of moving towards community safety, but how do we begin to hold these people? Like, we got to start going back into like when parents used to be like, ain't gonna be no locked doors in my house, right? What, like those are the kind of systems that really kept, I think, like that is the very basic system that kept us accountable. I can't lock my door, so I can't hide nothing. You know, there's like we didn't really have like cell phones and a lot of things, you know, that we had access to some things, but like that post was like, if these things are happening to us and it's being done to us by people who we are in community with, then what is going to be the community accountability? And so you're right, as we move toward this community safety model, we have to think about what this community accountability looks like. Truth of the matter is, it's like one of the things that I toggle with. I said, when my house was broken, when he stole my car, left his cell phone in there, and when I could have took that cell phone and felt like, what was I going to do? What would I look like? I would have got fried by the community if I would have decided to press charges. But little boo-boo ran to my house. He took my car. He stole my stuff. And so we have to somehow give the power back to the community to say, okay, as a community safety plan, we need to identify the people. Who do we really need to send? I don't know, to the criminal justice system. We got to stop. Like, who are we really afraid of, right? Like, and those are some of the kind of questions that we got to begin to ask. And we do imagine this new model of community safety, right? Moving it away from police and like you're right, Dr. Thomas. Like they say, if you see it, call this crime, call this hit line. No, you try. No, we're gonna die. Nobody's doing that. You know, that's what they say. Snitches get 6-foot ditches. But we're also afraid to like be in our own communities. We don't want to live there because it's not safe, right? One drug dealer moves into your neighborhood and it changes the whole dynamic. You start experiencing things that you never experienced before. And so this community that we love literally starts falling apart. It becomes very unsafe. Our kids can't play outside, right? And so we do have to build community safety, but that first has to start with communal accountability. We got to get the grannies back active. We got to get the gangsters back active. There was one point in time where it was like the OGs would say, you don't belong out here, go somewhere else. Go finish school, go do those things. You know, because we cannot keep relying on these systems. And one of the things that Shamika Pratt's right, I think she's on the next panel, nobody got us but us. We save ourselves first. You know.
Thank you.
Thank you. I celebrate. We're raising all, the things in this room, from internalized oppression to talking about racism and all the things that we struggle with. But thinking about community, I mean, it really goes back to, for me, and in the intentionality of the bodies of people who I'm currently working with is seeing the humanity in one another. Like, Reverend Thomas, James Cone in the Cross and Lynching Tree, speaks, we all know theologian Reinhold Niebuhr. And it's like, Niebuhr was great because Niebuhr was able to see and hear the nature of the oppressed people. But the question that befell Dr. Cone was, but could he feel, right? Could he feel? What does it mean, when we see that this Black woman's life was snuffed out, but we don't feel this is also being our daughter. But yet she is my daughter. She's my sister. She is me. And to understand community safety when working where we're divorced, there's a disconnect from those senses and sensibility of the heart. And to open up what it means to feel for one another and to really and truly know. And if it's a tenet of your faith, to believe that we are one. But, there are risks at play because I hear the voice inside of communities of color. And we all need to be held accountable for the child and the children on our block. But then what does that mean for those who categorize themselves within the dominant culture in terms of our children being safe on the street and them being responsible and the nature of that type of reprimand? I celebrate my son. I love him. He is very vocal. He's a lot like his mama. My daddy said, never break her spirit. But I do know that I have these conversations with my Elijah that, son, this looks different on you when you behave this way. And it's quite unfortunate. Or, son, you need not run through this supermarket, or, I really need for you to walk with me, or, you really, to his behavior. He's 10. He just wants to be a 10-year-old, but he's almost as tall as me. He's 180 pounds. And, he presents, as if he's 12 or 14. And even then, he's still a child. But what does that mean for him to be safe in community? So I don't know. I think that the education, and once again, needs to be this internal transformation of the self and understanding the nature of supremacy with regards to our white sisters and brothers and dominant culture, and how it is infused in every facet of our lives. And that in that, with these structures, that accountability, Reverend Stachelle, that, accountability is recognized in the face of the divine. But we got to get them to see, to hear, and to feel. And that's the work, right? That's the grace of God that, from the work of the church, and that is out in the world. So.
If I may share with you all, it really touched me, all the comments that I'm hearing about, our community accountability, and it makes me feel and think, how misinformed we are about who our community is and the realities of our community. And that has been a really powerful weapon, if I may use a violent word. It's a violent weapon to separate each other, to mistrust each other, and to create all these sentiments that are the best tool that white supremacy can use against our communities. For example, Reverend Thomas was talking about how racist we are within our communities. We are. In the Latinx community, we are racist. And I know that within the Black community and Brown community, we are racist. And I know that even within the immigrant community, we are prejudiced against other immigrants and against, other people of color. And that also happens as well with other Black and Brown communities that are prejudiced against, the immigrant and refugee communities. So how about, as part of our community accountability, that we start learning about who we are and bringing down those barriers? Something that Reverend Stachelle does, she does my dream of having a bus and going around the community. It is so beautiful because we have seen, in the work that we do here at La Casita, that when we welcome everybody and when we share pre-pandemic, we share a meal, and anyone in our neighborhood, Latinx or not, immigrant or not, Section 8 or not, comes to have a meal with us, we start seeing each other's humanity. Because, the work of 520-something years of colonization within my people, wanting and desiring with all our heart to be whiter than the white man, has created all these barriers also among ourselves and among, our neighbors and the rest of our community. So that accountability starts when we look very openly, very, if I may say, very naked, the realities that has kept our minds, our hearts, and the way that we see each other, so apart and so far away. So speaking about those issues, putting them at the table, a lot of people, within our community didn't understand the Black Lives Matter movement. And a lot of people were really, really shocked and couldn't understand. For me, I came 27 years ago. I met racism when I came to the US. I am mainstream back home. I am poor and I'm a woman. So, I don't have those those privileges back home. But I never knew racism until I came to the US. But if you speak to my indigenous sisters, they will tell you a different story from the one that I'm telling you right now. So those stories of who we are, those stories of how we got here, that we honor the struggle, that we honor the pain, and that we stay in solidarity. Again, for me, I have seen the waves. Today, this is the topic of the day. Today is the social justice topic of the day. How about all of them at the table and all of us intentionally, resisting and working really hard for us to know, for us to learn, for us, maybe we are not going to understand, but how can I at least sympathize and honor the pain that I see my neighbors, my friends, my community members, my siblings, my tribe, that they go through.
Thank you. And, I like the direction of the conversation because my next question is related to empathy. I think a couple of people have mentioned that concept, even if not by that term. But, for a while, and full disclosure, before I was in the dean's office at U of L, I was the department chair for criminal justice. And I was the department chair last year during the height of the protest. In that department, we also have the Southern Police Institute. So that means I was over the Southern Police Institute, which, if I'm really honest, doesn't necessarily ever match my ideology of what justice is, even though it's getting better. But, it was a conundrum for me to be in that position of having students who wanted to abolish the police and then students who are actively police officers patrolling the streets or supervising people patrolling the streets. So, one of the things that I did as chair is I had to speak at the Southern Police Institute's commencement every year, twice a year, actually. And the concept that I chose, because, can you imagine, what am I going to talk to a whole bunch of police officers and their families about? The concept that I chose was a concept called intellectual empathy. And, it's empathy, but it's putting your shoes in someone else's shoes as them, not what I would do if I was in their shoes, but no, why, putting their context into why that happened. And I get a lot of positive feedback from police officers after I have this conversation with them at commencement. So my question to you, so I think that there's a role of it with empathy in the pursuit of justice. So my question to you, and I think, Reverend Mayo has kind of talked a little bit about this more, but what role does empathy play in the pursuit of justice? And that can be for the police officers, it can be for community members, it can be for whoever, whatever stakeholder group that we're thinking about. But what role does empathy play in the pursuit of justice? And then how do we get people to feel for other people as them, not as me thinking, if I was Karina, I would blah, blah, blah. No, if I was Karina with her context and her experiences, can I now understand the choices that she makes or the feelings that she feels? Can I now hear her and listen to her? So let's talk a little bit about empathy as we reimagine public safety and community safety. What role does empathy play in all of this?
And if I may start, I think that one of the biggest, if we could say, sins or one of the most horrible things in the world is indifference. So, how can you start learning about that empathy if we live in a system that teaches us to be individualistic and to be indifferent? So, when it doesn't happen to us, who cares? When it doesn't affect us, who cares? Now, some of us come from societies that are community oriented, but when we arrive to this country, or when we are in communities where individualism is something really great, you start questioning about that. As an immigrant mom to US born kids, how do I explain to them that being individualistic and not caring about your neighbor and people around you is not a good thing, while they are being taught that is you yourself and only you are the ones, you are the one that has your destiny in your hands. But for Black and brown communities, unfortunately, that is not the truth, even though we are domesticated to believe that we have the power. The bootstraps thing that they mention all the time, that I really had to ask my husband, that is a Latino born in the US, what does that mean? What does that mean? What that bootstraps thing mean, that I can achieve my American dream? That if even US American born people have not achieved that dream that is being sold to all of us outside this nation. Because people really, my siblings, people really don't want to leave their places. People leave their places out of anguish and misery and living in situations that are unbelievable. But we are sold this dream outside this nation and inside this nation. And whenever that dream doesn't come true, then the system has found this idea that is the other's fault, that I haven't got to this point of my American dream. So that's where the lack of empathy. Why should I care about the other if I am suffering too? Why should I care about people being killed in those neighborhoods if that is not my neighborhood? I am pretty safe. How am I going to care about people dying of COVID if we don't have, I stay home and nothing is going to happen to me? So things like that are also part of the result of this domestication of thinking, that in the arrogance that you are so superior and that you can do anything you want. So I don't know how to say how we get to that empathy. I don't know how to teach people empathy, but something that we do want to perhaps talk about is how, if I don't have that empathy, if I wasn't raised with that empathy, how can we start with our children? Because some people really, in all reality, the domestication, the idea that I don't care about the others, is very difficult to break that wall. I might be wrong, but I see it in when people don't care about others being racist, about the system being racist, about the suffering of women, of children. I mean, and there are no words or explanation or PowerPoints or pictures, to make them see this is the suffering of the humankind right now in our world. So just wanted to share that before listening to the amazing ideas that we're going to hear from the reverends right now.
Well, if I could chime in, I think that in terms of your question about we must have human dignity. We must identify people that they are not only individual, but they have a level of dignity. Part of the whole colonization period that not only the country went through, but the world, is the notion that you are subservient, that you're less than an individual, you are property during the slavery times, but also that we must come to a reality that everybody has value. Individuals have value. And when we start seeing people to have value and that they are valuable, what can they add to the conversation? Earlier, it was mentioned that in order to walk into somebody's shoes, you have to have the notion that you desire to do it in the first place. A lot of people have no desire in policing. There's no desire to want to walk in the shoes of an African American young man at 15 years old living on the West End who is impoverished, not because they asked to live there, but because of systems that brought them to that place. One of the challenges that we have as a society, and if I could shift a little bit, because this question that was in the chat, I did want to kind of talk about that because it deals with human dignity, and that is the notion.
So that was the next question.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you want to, yeah. So I don't know if we want to let everybody else comment on this question, and then we move into that question.
All right.
Okay.
But my point is that you have to have human dignity. You have to identify people for who they are. And to Karina's comment about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, it is a notion that you are self-sufficient, that you have the ability to raise yourself up. You look at your situation, how can I engage? But there are sometimes systems are in place that you don't have the wherewithal. You know, when we talk about family wealth, when we talk about individual wealth, when we talk about historical wealth, you know, a lot of people in our community, because of things that took place in these systems, did not give us the opportunity. When we were redlined, the only place you could buy a house is in the West End. You know, when our soldiers came back serving our country, we're told that you can't get a VA loan because you don't look like the others. And so the rise and the boom of neighborhoods and subdivisions in the suburbs, you know, I'm still fairly new to Louisville, and I can tell you that people in Louisville are still upset that Louisville is metro, that this one unity of a county is all part of one city. They still don't want to know. I mean, anytime we still have individual police departments, yet we say, you know, St. Matthews, and you have Shively Police Department, but yet we all supposed to be part of Louisville. You know, you want the address, but you don't want the reality.
Wow. Thank you, Reverend Thomas. In terms of, and yes, I think y'all named it, you know, empathy is, you know, Karina just naming the arrogance and the individualistic nature of who we have become as a society. Reverend Thomas speaking to how divorced from one another that we are. We don't even know our neighbors anymore. Empathy is setting aside our own pride. And I think, at least for me, my experience is that it's been derived when I've been open to listen. I've learned so much from just listening to people's stories, and it's created and opened my heart to be more empathetic to what their spiritual journeys have been, their life journeys have been. When I hear a story that, you know, well, I didn't realize, because, you know, for me, when dealing with my white brothers and sisters, it's like, how long, Lord? How long will this go on, right? And it's like this frustration. But then when I can sit across from a white sister who said, you know what, Val, it wasn't until I was 30 years old and I went to purchase a property deed. And that property deed said no Negroes, no Chinese, and no Jews. That my eyes were opened up and I looked at my husband and it became real and apparent for me that racism exists. I personally need to hear those stories so that I can be more empathetic to the realities of the other folk who share our community, in order that we can then ultimately share, you know, this love that we've been called to do. But I think that creating space like this, you know, for me to share that I was broken down on Broadway. 4 officers passed by me as my daughter and I were literally stuck in cement. More to share about that story at another time, but they passed by, you know, not one stopped. But yet, when I was out in the demonstrations, my children were terrified by the militaristic behaviors and the flashbangs from just walking down the street. So, but that needs to be shared and communicated, you know, the nature of that neglect, that we were just left stranded there with no care or concern, no empathetic response, you know, as people drove by, these officers drove by on the street, but then this over-policed militaristic response of people who are singing joyfully, walking in the sunshine, calling, you know, for the name of justice. So I think it's, you know, in the sharing of those stories, we open up the space for our hearts to feel one another, or at least be more open to feel.
Thank you. Thank you. Reverend Stachelle, any comments? You want me to go to the next question? Okay, I see you, you know, nodding in agreement. All right, so we do have a question from a viewer, and the question is, how do we balance working within the systems that exist to serve the community mindfully and without causing further harm, or is that even possible? Specifically, I come from the mental health field. So I know, Reverend Thomas, you had something that you wanted to say.
Yeah, I was trying to get ahead there. And that is a great question, because part of the idea of public safety and community safety is also identifying and acknowledging the mental health realities. If it had not been, and as preachers we say this, if it had not been for God on our side, where would we be? Some of us are just really one after Sunday service away from going to being committed. A friend of mine shared with me that the church becomes the catalyst of a place that we're dealing with people who have issues, um, problems, issues that they're struggling with. They look for a spiritual experience to help them deal with everyday life. And we have an awesome responsibility to try to navigate them through just to the next week. We don't know, when we are having conversations with individuals, what they're bringing to the table, what's behind them. So balancing these systems that individuals have to come through is keep in mind that people have challenges. And just because I didn't go off today does not mean next week I won't go off. I know my personality. I share with my members. Is a reason why I don't put on the back of the car, "Follow me to Quinn Chapel," or I don't have the fish symbol on the back of my car. Not that I'm denying who I am as a Christian. And when I get out of church on Sunday, I take my collar off, because when I go into a restaurant, I might have a moment, and I know the speed limit says a certain miles, but I push the edge, and so I don't want people to be misled about Christians, and not from me. But I say that to say that we have to be able to bridge this gap. We have to have these conversations and identifying individuals who are coming to the table, and we have to be strong enough to say that, and real enough to say, "I can't handle this. I need to refer this." When we're dealing with issues in policing, that the police officers have to realize, "I can't handle this situation." Just because I was trained, well, a lot of us are trained in various capacities, but even though we were trained, doesn't mean that we can handle every situation. And we have to be able to offer alternatives for individuals, and especially we have to be sensitive to those who are in the mental health, having crisis and having breakdowns, that are finding themselves on the short end of the stick, and find themselves being victimized while they're trying. The case up in Rochester, New York, the man was having a breakdown in the midst of that, and actually ended up being killed. When the family called for help, he was actually killed. And something that I think somebody mentioned earlier, that when we're looking at sensitivity, just because I am Black and I'm having a mental breakdown doesn't mean that you come with all the force of the whole police department to navigate how to de-escalate. But then when we look on video and seeing somebody white with a machete slicing the police officer, and the person gets away, and actually gets to go and get something to eat, before even not even being arrested, we take them back home, And so those are the challenges that we must have to realize, that it is harmful, that if we're not treating people with dignity, but we also have to be available to bridge that gap of looking at the systems and the structures that are in place, and how we can legislate and also enforce those changes that need to take place.
That's a twofold question. It's probably one of the more interesting questions, because I think we tend to get in some spaces and we assimilate without even knowing it. So it's really, really hard to work in these spaces and not begin to assimilate to all the things to these systems. They are embedded in every place that we go. Like, we watch the news, every place that we go is literally wrapped in all these systemic issues, whether it be patriarchy, or whether it be racism, or whether it be there's a lot of our homophobia. Like, a lot of places that we go are wrapped in these issues. And so I remember being at the King March in Memphis, and Dr. like Michael Eric Dyson was like, what you got to do is you got to play cool till you get in. And when you get in, you let all 50 shades of that Negro in you out. And so literally, we have to play nice to get to the table, to get to these places, to get to the table, to get to some of these situations. Our job is when we get there is to turn it over if it ain't right. We don't assimilate, right? We have to be in these spaces. We have to be at the table. We have to be a part of these systems to change it. It's just that when we get there, we cannot let those things change us, right? And a lot of us get discouraged, right? A lot of us do. We get in these systems and we get discouraged. We can't even stay. Like, I got to leave because I need to protect my peace and my freedom. Because if I stay, then something's gonna go down. You know, I'm like you every time. I got to take my collar off because I'm telling you, it's gonna be a little different. But that's the thing. Like, everything about these broken systems are embedded into our everyday life. When we go to our jobs, when we go, you know, when we watch TV, when our kids go to these schools, when we go buy a car, when we try to buy a house, like, all these systems are embedded into some of these things. And I do think that people really won't see the appreciation for who we are or for us and how important we are until we just stop showing up to these places. You know, and that's, you know, I'm a little bit of both. Okay, maybe I got to play nice. You know, I'm not going to argue back and forth with the councilman while he's going crazy, you know, but I also don't have to bring myself to it, right? I got some places don't even invite me because it's going to cost me. It's going to cost me my peace, or I'm going to have to bring my peace, and I don't want anybody to do that. You know, so, you know, so I just think, you know, as we begin to navigate these systems and navigate what we're reimagining, we don't got to work. We don't have to work for these people. We don't have to work we don't have to subject ourselves, you know, to these type of job atmospheres and job and harsh environments. Right now, what are we seeing right now? We're seeing a culture shock. No, people don't want to come to work. People are lazy. No. What happened was that when the low barrier workers were coming, when the waiters were coming, when they was running the drive-through line, we treated them like crap. And now it's like they don't want to come because they have just decided, it's not that they're lazy or it's not, but they've just decided, I don't really have to deal with that. Right. And so as we begin to reimagine everything, we got to reimagine everything. I'm not even going, I can't even accept a job if this is the culture of it. I can't even be in the space if this is the culture of it. I can't do this if this is the culture of it, right? We have to be willing to say, what are we going to give up now to get what we want later? You know, and ultimately, when we do get in there, shake the table, toss the table, turn it over, but do not assimilate, you know, and keep applying pressure to those people, you know, as we talk about equitable change and equality and what that actually means, you know, in our workplaces and then in these other places.
Thank you. If I can just chime in, I know I'm not on the panel, but as a moderator, I know earlier, I don't remember who brought it up, but talked about people saying that we need more police officers from the West End, or we need more Black police officers. And in my academic context of public administration, that is called representative bureaucracy. And the problem with representative bureaucracy is that, again, the system hasn't changed. So you can diversify all you want to, but if the systems and structures are still there, then you can't do anything about it. And so I just want to wear a little empathetic hat, because I actually do have several former students, Black students, who are police officers and are police officers at LMPD. And I've had conversations with some of them. I even taught a class with one of them who actually quit in January of this year, just for many reasons, but partially the difficulties of policing as a Black man last year on the streets, and a Black man from West Louisville. And so, you know, asking people to not assimilate is one thing. Like, I don't have to assimilate at the University of Louisville because I have academic freedom and tenure. So guess what? I'm gonna say what I want to say. I'm gonna do what I want to do. However, when I think about my students or former students who are Black officers, if they don't agree with the union, with the FOP, they still have to sign up. You want to know why? Because they're not protected if they're not. If they don't assimilate to a certain standard, they might be unsafe on the street and can't get home to their families, you know? And so it's a difficult situation. And so, you know, honestly, I'd just be like, don't be a police officer, you know, because I don't really believe if we don't dismantle the systems and structures that more Black police officers or more police officers from the West End can change anything from the inside, because it's so entrenched, and policing is based in white supremacy and centered whiteness. And that has to change. And I think that's why we get so many people that are like, abolish it. But you know, that doesn't mean that there can't be some type of enforcement, right? But does it have to look like modern policing today? Perhaps it doesn't, you know? And so a lot of the concepts that you've talked about, you know, we study, we research, we talk to the people about. I'm a researcher that talks with people. I'm a qualitative researcher. I'm tired of numbers. We have enough numbers. We already know what's wrong. We need to start understanding why it's happening and what we can do to fix it. So I really appreciate all of you all and your perspectives. It's been a great time. Like, I can tell you that I am really appreciated hearing from this perspective, as opposed to all the ones I'm always on. So I was very grateful to be asked to moderate this panel. So we are wrapping up. So I thought what I would do as a closeout is to give each panelist an opportunity to just say some final, you know, remarks. And so everyone can get on with their day. I really appreciate meeting those of you who seeing people that I haven't met in real life before. And I appreciate what you're doing for our state and our city. And yeah, so does anybody have any final remarks or comments?
May I share my gratefulness to be surrounded by these amazing siblings. Thank you so much for enlightening me today and for sharing your thoughts and for also being in community with me this morning. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
I had to express my thanks. This was, eye-opening and insightful, and I just lean into the relationship. You know, one of the things that we recognize is that this is lifelong, life-wide, and life-deep work. And it takes all of us to be at the table sharing with one another so that we can uplift each other's voices and those who are in our care. So God bless all of you. Thank you again for us being together.
I'm grateful that the two worlds get to collide. I've spent the last 3 years with Vanderbilt, Dr. Teresa Smallwood, in the public theology cohort. It's changed my life drastically. And I remember one time when I was leaving, when we were wrapping up our closing ceremony. One thing that kept me in the fight when I was big, fought against getting on that board, was that if we wanted to change it, that we had to get in it. And so every time I wanted to quit everything that I was doing, I was reminded that in order for it to change, that we got to be on these boards. We have to be at these council meetings. We have to pay attention to the things that are being done and said about our community, because ultimately it affects our life-changing and our life-sustaining work. Thank you to Dr. Edwards, who I absolutely adore, for accepting the invitation to come and moderate this panel. I sure wish she would have talked more, y'all, because she is a wealth of knowledge that we get to borrow and lean on and lean into. And so thank you to every perspective, to Dr. Troy, to Reverend Troy Thomas and Karina. Of course, we've seen each other, and Reverend Mayo, who we worked together at this point for several times. Like, we just keep being the community. Nobody will save us but us.
So, in echoing the words of others, I'm thankful for the opportunity to be a part of this and to engage, which is really about how to reimagine public safety. Is about engagement. The panelists you have, certainly, all good preachers take notes, because I tell people, somebody gonna hear it again in the sermon, and that's a learning curve for all of us. It's an opportunity for us to get to the place that we can engage and receive. When we close our ears to what's being said, that affects our community. And so I'm thankful. Thank you again, Dr. Edwards. I'm looking forward to opportunities to continue to hear your research and the things that you're doing, and to others as well on this panel. Some I've heard about and seen in social media outlets, that things that you're doing. But I think it's imperative that hearing different voices and coming to the same platform, it adds dimension to the work that we're doing about bringing change. And and we may not all get there at the same time, but it's for the long haul. And we have to also look back and start raising up the next generation of individuals who have an opportunity to do what we're attempting to do, even if we can't achieve it, but equipping them with better tools that some of us didn't have, but we had to go out and take the limestone and make a spear out of it to bring down the Goliaths. And so we have to also let them know that you can do it and you can achieve. Thank you again for the opportunity, to Reverend Carroll and to Dr. Smallwood and the others a part of this. We're grateful. And my good former member, Senator Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you all. So I am going to now turn it over to Senator Thomas for closing remarks.
Okay. Well, Dr. Dawson Edwards, you did a great job moderating this panel. What a dynamic panel. What great thought and really learning that at least I encountered today. I want to come back to you, Dr. Dawson Edwards, for my final comments. I realize we're coming close to the 1 o'clock hour. There are 3 points I want to make, so I'm going to try to get this done in like 5 or 6 minutes. Number one, Dr. Ruthven, thank you very much for organizing this. And I want to tell you that your scheduling this conference on reimagining public safety couldn't come at a more appropriate time. It's almost like you were clairvoyant. And I say that because today, the United States Census Bureau released its report on the 2020 census. And what the report noted was that for the first time in American history, our non-white population exceeded 40%. The white population of America now is only 57%. 43% makes up the non-white population. And there are a lot of interesting statistics when you look at the color of America today, the diversity of America today. But the one thing that stands out to me more than anything else is that for Americans under 18, those that are still children, not adults, for the first time in American history, that majority is non-white. 53% of all children, all under age 18 members of America are non-white. So what that tells you is that as we talk about reimagining public safety, that group 30 years from now will be our future educators. That group 30 years from now will be our future ministers and pastors. And that group 30 years from now will be our police officers. So as we talk about reimagining public safety, we really need to reimagine America and what America will look like in 30 years when these under 18 individuals are now, approaching 50 or in their 40s. America's going to be completely different. So we really need to reimagine America, and public safety, as we heard about today, as a critical piece of it. Number two, I enjoy these kind of conversations, but I always say to others as we talk about these ideas and concepts that there certainly is a call to action here. And an example, Dr. Ruthven, that you were a part of just recently was here in Lexington, when the faith leaders over the last year took it upon themselves to say that we're going to change the way Lexington polices. And just 2 months ago, after a whole year of marches and rallies and discussions, Lexington voted by the Lexington Public City Council by 2/3 percentage, 67% voted to ban no-knock warrants. That was historic for the faith leaders of all races and genders to come together and say, we've got to have this change. We've got to we got to police differently here in Lexington, and they did that. Okay. Obviously, the third and final point I've got to make as a legislator is that we have to get out and vote. We talk about wanting change, and we need change in this country. There's no question about it. We need change in Louisville, in Lexington, in Kentucky, and in America. But change only comes if we participate in that change. And the best way and the most effective way for us to make that change is by voting. We need to look no further than last year when we went out to vote. And we saw that when we show up at the polls and we show up in numbers, we can elect a president, we can elect a U.S. Senate, and we can elect a U.S. House of Representatives. And because we did that, what did we see? We saw a government work to say that when a pandemic comes and you can't get work, we're going to provide funds for you so you can live. We saw a government say that we're going to take steps for the first time to eliminate child poverty. So if you have children, we're going to give you money so that you can feed, clothe, and house those children so they're not impoverished. We saw a government that said that if you're a small business person, whether it's a restaurant or a hairdresser or whatever it is, if you can't have customers come in because of a pandemic, we're going to provide you money in grants mostly so that you can survive during this pandemic. A government that for the first time in recent memory put poor people and working people first as opposed to the wealthy. Okay, and that's because we came out and voted. So I will end with that. Again, Dr. Ruthven, thank you for doing this. And Dr. Dawson Edwards, I really would like to have a sidebar with you soon because I am a policymaker. And I do recognize that there needs to be change. I guess I will say I'm not convinced that we need to destroy or just totally redo the system. That there can be changes that can take place that will improve the system without destroying it. But again, as you know, I have a lot of respect for your intellect, your scholarship. As I said, as you indicated, I used to work with you, and I enjoyed your leadership. And since you are a Kentuckian, I'd like to have a sidebar with you at some point soon before I go back into the very important budgetary 2022 session to talk about your ideas as what we can do to make America a more perfect union, going forward. And with that, Dr. Ruthven, I'm done.
Thank you, Senator Thomas, for your outstanding moral and prophetic leadership. I want to thank each panelist. You are all giants in our community, and I'm grateful for everything that you are doing in this important fight for racial justice and change in our community. I want to invite everyone to return for our afternoon session, where we will have a similarly talented group of panelists. Be safe, be well, and please join us again this afternoon. We will convene at 1 o'clock Central Time, and we will have another panel of outstanding experts as we continue to reflect on how we reimagine public safety in Kentucky. Thank you very much.